celebrating the art of storytelling and the artists who bring stories to life. This is the Viewfinder Podcast with Chris Hadley.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Hadley and welcome once again to the Viewfinder Podcast. Shot entirely on 16mm film, the evocative documentary UNSEEN Olympiad takes an emotional look at the journeys of young athletes from around the world as years of preparation and struggle lead to moments where victory and defeat are measured not just by effort, but also by heart. Directed by Casey Shaw, UNSEEN Olympiad was filmed in 2023 at the Winter and Summer World University Games. And earlier this year, it played during the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan and Cortina as part of the event's Cultural Olympiad. The film will next screen at the upcoming Baton Rouge Underground Film Festival on Saturday, August 29th at the Manship Theatre in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It'll be shown back-to-back alongside fellow documentary The Sight Unseen, beginning at 11 a.m. Central Time. Casey, welcome to the show. It is great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Now, for those who may not be familiar, what is UNSEEN Olympiad about? How did this film come together, and what, as well as who, inspired you to make it?
UNSEEN Olympiad is about the emotional journey behind international sporting events and how these athletes experience that emotional journey throughout the process of initial fear and persistence into finding their passion and following the actions that come from that passion, and then ultimately the joy and release that comes from having competed at that level. You said as far as how did we create the film as well?
Yes.
And so initially it was a similar process to what these athletes go to. There was a lot of persistence that took place in the beginning where we needed to get access to smaller test events to prove that we could be a viable candidate to be able to film these athletes on a big stage. And ultimately we worked our way up from filming with middle school and high school athletes to filming at the World University Games events. And since we've done those events, now we've filmed some Olympic Games as well. And so the process of this has kind of mirrored the process of training as an athlete does at smaller competitions and up into larger ones. And we filmed in both Lake Placid, New York, and in Chengdu, China for UNSEEN Olympiad, and we're able to tell really, really unique and beautiful stories there.
How did you get the opportunity to film those competitions, the 2023 Winter World University Games, which took place, as you mentioned, in Lake Placid, and the Summer Games, which took place later that year in Sichuan, China? And what specifically motivated the decision to shoot those competitions as well as the Olympic competitions you've shot on vintage 16mm film?
Those two factors, shooting on film and shooting these events, came in tandem. Initially, like I mentioned, we started with filming with a test event in Lake Placid. So when there's these big international sporting events, they do test events for the venues to make sure that the venue teams are all up and running and everything is kind of set to go, and they do some operational and logistical tests with that. We didn't have access yet to film the actual Lake Placid event, which took place in January and February of 2023. But they said, okay, you guys can come to the test event, which was a middle school slope style competition and a FIS World Cup event for alpine skiing, which was the younger athletes event. And one was at Gore Mountain, and the other one was at Whiteface Mountain up in Lake Placid. And so we filmed some test footage there, and we shot it on 35mm and 16mm. And we showed this test footage to the event organizers at Lake Placid, and they saw what we did, and they liked it enough to give us the green light to be able to have access to film during the World University Games in Lake Placid. We made a 30-minute, essentially proof of concept film called In the Spirit of Youth, which was in the style of a 1970s / 1980s-esque traditional sports documentary with some artistic flourishes that were a little bit unique to our own style. We shot with film that was aged to that era or very expired, so that we could have a look that appeared as if it was archival footage from previous events that took place in Lake Placid, such as the 1932 and 1980 Winter Olympics or the 1972 World University Games Winter, which took place there. And we created this modern archival film that had its own texture and feel, and was very distinct from what was being created for the official film, which was created by NYU students on high-end digital cameras, or was created by the broadcasters like ESPN Plus, who were capturing films as, within broadcast standards. And so we were creating our own thing visually and also aesthetically. And because of this, we were able to stand out to the Chengdu organizing committee when we were pitching to go to China later that year. They had tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of video production equipment, expertise, marketing, and broadcasting prowess. They had CCTV, the top broadcaster in China, broadcasting the event with hundreds of cameras as if it was, any major event that has this World University Games summer had about between 7,000 and 10,000 athletes. So it's almost to Olympic scale, and some of the venues look very, very standardized with Olympics or Asian Games or any of these major sporting events that occur. So the broadcast standard fit that. We could never pitch that we were going to come in and match that level of spend or that level of production value. But we could say is we have film cameras and we have a very unique perspective, and we have an artistic perspective that you guys might be missing out on otherwise. And they saw that too, and they saw that they had pretty much everything covered, but they didn't have what we were offering, and they said, sure, let's give it a shot. And so the choice of medium, not only was it a choice for the story to elevate athletes that are all younger and likely have never seen themselves shot on real film, but also to add to our positionality as far as getting access to these events, because we're offering something unique and distinct.
With both Lake Placid and Sichuan as backdrop, how did those locations and the obvious cultural differences evident in both inform the storytelling and production approaches you took to UNSEEN Olympiad?
Well, first off, there were a lot of similarities between the two. Like, I want to cite that our film is one of the only documentaries in recent years that was shot by an American filmmaker in both the United States and China, and it serves as a piece to point towards international unity and international goodwill. And so oftentimes we see it as the two weather systems in Lake Placid and Chengdu, which is basically ice and fire, where Chengdu is a similar climate to New Orleans, whereas Lake Placid is more Canadian and colder and icy, a very icy winter landscape. So right off the bat, the two main differences were in the climate, and from there, we had great experiences at both. Like, both were staffed by fantastic, local people. We were given open arms to all the venues and to wherever we needed to go. As within reason, we were given complete access to everything we needed to film in both places, and it was very much once we had our accreditation sorted out, and once the first couple of days of each event go by, where people are very conservative as far as what they're willing to let you do, because they've been preparing for several years and they don't want to mess the first few days up. Once they get their feet under them, which is very normal for any event in any culture, things open up and things become more flexible and fluid. And so we saw that be the case for both events, and we were really welcomed with open arms. The cultural differences are very interesting as far as the history goes, because although China has a multiple thousands of year old culture, their sports culture is still very new, and they're investing quite a bit of spend into becoming international sports players, whereas the United States, although is a much newer country and is much more of an infant relative to the length that our country has existed, it is quite storied as far as holding these international sporting events. So there's a lot of people that are multiple times over having a pedigree of sport that has occurred with events that have occurred in the U.S. So it's very interesting to see the difference in traditions and get to play visually and artistically in both communities. And again, we're using historical techniques to point back to our visual language. So we were looking at events visually for China, like we did with Lake Placid, where we were looking at the 30s, 70s, and 80s. We were looking at visual references from the early 2000s with Shenzhen holding the World University Games in 2011, with the Beijing Olympics in 2008, with the World University Games in 2001 that was also held in China. We were looking at those as visual references, and it created a really nice aesthetic combination between the two, because we're still looking at history, but as countries we have different histories, and so we wanted that to inform the artistic approach.
In terms of the Olympic footage that you shot, that you referenced earlier, what events were you able to film, and how did you get the opportunity to bring your film team to the Olympics to shoot those events there?
So we filmed in Paris in 2024, and we also filmed in Milan this year, and some of the events surrounding the Milan Olympics in Livigno and Berdazzo and some of the other venues for that games. With Paris, it was as simple as looking up the directions on the spectator guide and seeing that they had a requirement that the camera needed to be a certain size. And so they said, you can bring in a camera, no problem, as long as you use it for your own personal use and non-commercial use. And you can bring in a camera that's a certain size, and I can forget the size of it. So I looked at the guide and I said, okay, well, I'm attending the Olympics anyways. We went with my family and my sister who's also a cinematographer, and her boyfriend, and our sound person, and one of our producers from UNSEEN Olympiad as well, Spencer Poole and Kelly Dawkins, and they came to the games with us. And so we went into these events, and it was mostly me and my sister, but John, my sister's boyfriend, filmed a bit as well. But we would bring in these cameras that were within the regulations, and these were 16 millimeter cameras, similar to something that someone would see as a news gathering camera in the 60s. Bell & Howell 240, Siemens Kino Camera 2C, and then I would sometimes bring a Bolex, which was slightly larger than the restrictions, but no one seemed to mind. And so I was just bringing them in through spectator portals and filming from spectator areas. And I've ended up with footage from probably between 7 and 10 sports, diving, swimming, gymnastics, table tennis, BMX, skateboarding, 100-meter dash, other athletic events, women's rugby, and maybe something else, and a bit of the opening ceremony fan experience. And so I just played by the rules, really. And I just looked at what the rules were, and I played by the rules. In Italy, we tried to do the same thing. The rule in Italy was no cameras with a lens longer than 20 centimeters. So we brought lenses that were small, but I also brought a camera that was very large. And it was a 35 millimeter movie camera called an Aton 35-3. And I was curious if it was going to work. And at the same time, something that had helped was UNSEEN Olympiad had been accepted into the Cultural Olympiad program, which is the arts and culture festival that coincides with every Olympics that's put on by the host organizing committee. So UNSEEN Olympiad was accepted into the Cultural Olympiad. So I had some degree of legitimacy as a filmmaker in Milan, that when I was questioned, which happened maybe half the time or 40% of the time, at the security checkpoint at the venue, when I was questioned, I said, hey, I'm not just a a spectator. I'm also a filmmaker who has a part of the program here, and I'm doing a documentary. I'm not selling this footage. I'm not a broadcaster. It's really just for archival, and the beautiful thing is no one is doing it. So there weren't 20 other people with film cameras that were trying to get in. It was just myself and Gaines Owen and Alejandro Moreno, my two friends, and my family that was with me. So it was very much a small operation, and just being honest with people and being upfront and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, and is this okay with you? And if there was a no, I would have accepted the no. But within Milan, it was very easy. Within Paris, it was very easy, and I don't necessarily know or foresee it being as simple as it was there as it will be in the U.S. Because security concerns are very different here, and people's media attractability is very different here. But ideally, by then, I'll have some more official access, and I'm taking steps to do so now.
And will we be seeing any of that footage anytime soon?
So right now there's an after movie that I've created that's from the Milan Cortina event, and that's available on YouTube, on the Shawscope YouTube page. And I'm creating a documentary right now. It's a documentary short about the idea of pilgrimage as it relates to people who are spectating for international sporting events. It's going to include footage from both Paris, Milan, and recent footage from the Fan Fest of the FIFA World Cup this year. And I'm creating a documentary about this concept and about how people are not just fans of these things. They're creating some type of spiritual event in which they have FIFA or the IOC or somewhere pick somewhere on a map, 6 to 10 years before, and then they somehow are all attracted to this place that they may have never gone before, and they go for a very specific reason, and they're spending any expense to go to do so. And why is this the case? It can't just be because they love the team or something. I feel like there's something deeper there, and I'd like to explore that. And that's what I'm preparing for at the moment. It'll probably be released sometime next year, but it is an ongoing project, so it takes some turns, weaves and turns.
Yeah. And Shawscope is your production company. What is the YouTube channel for it?
The YouTube channel for it is at Shawscope, SHAWSCOPE. Yeah.
Getting back to Unseen Olympiad, the film explores not only the competitive aspects of international amateur sport as seen through the athletes, but also the emotional side of competition. In terms of visuals and narrative, how did you capture both of those dynamics?
It was very important to have a script prior to filming. And it's interesting, the concept of creating a script for a documentary when you really have no idea what's going to happen in each of these events. And we're filming, over 25 different sports in 2 different countries, and athletes from all over the world. And we really don't know what's going to happen specifically. Having a script allowed us to play and to be able to create something that was going to be cohesive and have its own emotional moments. There were moments that are not replicable by simply saying, okay, I want this to look like this and this person to do this thing. We really have no control over it. So what me and as far as the visuals go, my cinematographer Levi Porter and I, what we did is we created a visual approach that was going to be similar to what I like to kind of call like a palette approach, where for a painter they have a palette of like 10 colors, and sometimes they mix the colors and sometimes they just use one of the colors, but at the same time they have a palette, and that palette creates the whole painting. We weren't relying on one motif to drive the film, or like one visual thing to drive the film. It was like, we chose a certain lens here, we chose a certain filter here, we chose a certain, camera position here or there. And that way, when we went into a venue and the venue security said, "Oh, you guys have to film from the media seats and you can't film from the field of play," or when we went into a different one and they said, "Oh, you can go have the closest possible angle, but you can't be in the spectator stands," or we had walked up a mountain on the side of Whiteface Mountain or so, and you can't stand up because if you stand up, you'll fall down the hill and you'll get in the way of the competition. So you have to stay in one spot. And so there were all these limitations that were happening, or these constraints that were happening. And because we had this palette approach of our visual language being clear and we had a script ahead of time, it was very easy to adapt and to be fluid and flexible in telling our story.
Was this approach to the film storytelling influenced by certain athletes and their events, or just the overall atmosphere of these competitions and the emotions that they evoke for both competitor and spectator?
I would say it's more the latter than any specific athlete necessarily. We didn't want to have any stars in this. There are athletes that are in our film that, I would say everyone is a star in this. It's an ensemble piece. But as far as like a leading person, there isn't someone that's leading the film. There may be someone's favorite and there may be someone that they enjoy their performance the most, but as far as like we're selling this film because of this person's in it, that's not this type of film. And because of that, what we're looking for is what's happening in the spaces in between, oh, this person is supposed to win, or this, this is the, this country versus this country, and that's the story. Like what's happening around those stories? Like what, because those stories are very often told by broadcasters. What's happening on a deeper level, and it's there that we found most of our inspiration.
What were some of the biggest emotions you attempted to capture in this film, and how did you determine what athletes and sports best represented those emotions?
Again, it was the outline was fear, passion, and joy. And those things were found after. I had a framework, an understanding of generally like the progression of the athlete and the story of the athlete. Being an athlete myself, I was briefly a college athlete. I was an athlete throughout high school and middle school, and even before. And I relate to that experience myself. The granularity of it, I've been to I think 16 or so international multi-sport events throughout my life. My dad was a person who worked with event organizing committees. So he was the one who was helping them get ready when they'd maybe never done a game before. And we would travel to these events growing up. So I would have exposure to these events from a very, very young age. And I've been seeing what it's like to be witness to a moment like on at the finish of a short track speed skating race, where everyone has fractions of a degree of being able to win or not win throughout the competition, and oftentimes the two people in the front will take each other out, and the person in third or fourth will end up winning at the very last moment. It's this complete surprise. There's no way to plan for that moment to happen, but there is an understanding that everyone in that race feels that that's possible. And so how can we show that feeling and that tension within that sport? And there's certain sports where there's a lot of tension throughout. There's certain sports where there's tension on a single moment, like a pole vault. Well, actually, pole vault's a little different. Like I would say pole vault, it approaches more and more and more and more tension, similar to high jump, as less and less attempts, become made by the other competitors. It kind of winnows down. Something like swimming, like it's heats, sure, but then once you're there, it's all out, it's all or nothing, and it's you versus you in that pool. There are different feelings that are happening within these sports, and visually we get to see different things, and so it's about pulling certain parts of these events and pulling certain parts of this visual that allows us to tell the story in a cohesive manner.
Not only is the film narratively compelling, but it is also visually arresting, with some of the footage, like that of swimming and diving, tinted in different colors, in this case red as opposed to blue, than what might be expected. What specifically inspired that approach to those sequences, and in what ways does it add to the emotional core of the film's broader presentation of athletes and their journeys?
The approach towards taking the color filtration was derived from wanting to find a color theory within our Chinese unit to match a similar approach to Chinese cultural color theory versus Western color theory. And so we used on-the-lens filtration. A lot of it would have been normally used for black and white photography, but we used it with color film. And in using this on-the-lens filtration, we wanted to match certain colors to certain elements that were in Confucian color theory. So when we would see water, the element for water, the color for water in this Confucian theory is black. And the only way for us to turn the water black in camera was to use a red filter to cut out all of the blue. And so the blue turned to black and everything else turned to red. And so you get this really unique combination of red, which is represented as fire, and black, which is represented as water. And it occurs at certain key moments in the film where we really wanted to isolate the athletes and show them in the depths of their fear and focus and concentration. And that high contrast environment was really useful there. To contrast that with the blue filter that we used for tennis and badminton, where we're focusing on the element of air and weightlessness and a little bit more freedom and things like that. Green with earth and the combat sports. And I could go further, but that's the general approach.
Besides its visuals, sound is a huge part of the film. In what ways did you use sound to communicate the emotions of these athletes and the intensity of the moments before, during, and after competition, as well as the sports themselves?
It's a huge credit to both Spencer Poole, our sound mixer, production sound mixer and sound designer, and Oliver Bonney, our composer. They worked in tandem to create, as well as Miles Labatt, our producer, who served as a music supervisor as well, who's also a jazz musician. And the combination of their approach within the sonic landscape really drove us to a new height, I believe. The limitation, there were some limitations that we had as far as how much music could we create versus license, just budgetary wise, and so that left us with some gaps. And it was really interesting. It's like, okay, well, what fills in the gaps? And like, there's a moment where in the first table tennis sequence where Spencer reached out to me and he said, "How about a song like for the hits of the paddle, of the balls being hit by the paddle?" And I was like, "A song?" I was like, "Okay, cool, great. Like, let's hear it." And because we did a spotting session, I was like, "Okay, I want music here and here and here, and diegetic here and here and here." And she's like, "What about a song?" I'm like, "Okay." And so I hear this first time that he sent me the that segment of the film, and the attention and the focus is just brought directly onto each of the strikes of one of those paddles. Now, if you would have heard that event in real life, you would hear music playing throughout all of the competitions and many of the sports. There's just music playing at these events now. It's just this the nature of modern sporting events. It very rarely gets quiet. There's some like tennis where it's quiet, but a lot of times now they just put on music, and that's not what the athletes are feeling. Like, that music is non-existent to them, most likely. They're not, they're so focused on what they're doing and their competition that there could be music, talk radio, an interview, broadcast, or anything happening, sound effects, who knows, and they probably wouldn't notice one way or the other. They're completely locked in. And so the thesis of this film is to take people who've never experienced a games themselves to the event to feel it as if they were there, or if they were even competing there. And the sonic landscape, I feel like, captures that fantastically. I think what Spencer Oliver and Miles did with that concept, took it so far, and I really do believe that it pushes the boundaries of what's possible within documentary filmmaking as well, because it's a very narrative approach to take mostly Foley and add this Foley in later, but I believe that we're doing so in order to not take creative liberties and change what happened, but to heighten the perception of what was happening for certain people who were there, and show that in an artistic manner.
The film is narrated in Mandarin, Chinese, English, Norwegian, French, Portuguese, and Japanese language. In terms of preparing this narration, how does it connect to what we see and hear, and how does it help to bridge the cultural gap between these nationalities in terms of the storytelling?
The intention behind having multiple language narrators is to create an understanding in the viewer that when one attends these type of events, they're going to be hearing languages that they don't understand, and yet they're still going to understand things from these cultures, even if they don't have the specifics. And there's often times where I've been sitting at some of these sporting events, and I've sat next to somebody from a country in Africa, and then I've sat next to somebody from a country in Europe or from Asia or from wherever, and everyone has a shared language, whether or not we're talking to each other. Sometimes you find common ground, and oh, who's your team? Where are you from? And they talk about where they're from, and they said, oh, they may have visited your country, or you may have visited theirs, or you may have had a shared cultural interest or something like that, a musician or food or something. And there's this common ground that arises in these events that I don't think we see much of in the broadcast. And so I really wanted to, one, show that experience, but also with having a large portion of the film, about 40% in Mandarin Chinese, to give equal weight to the voices of the host country of China, as well as the host country of the United States. And I wanted to really make sure that as an American filmmaker, my film is going to be an American film regardless of how international I make it. It's just the case of me being an American. It's just what it is. But how can I make an American film that allows for the voices of other cultures to be heard? And how can I make an American film that represents many of the Americans that don't necessarily speak English as their first language? And we have millions of folks like that in the United States, and they are often ignored as far as media coverage goes or filmmaking goes. And it's just the default that everything's in English and take it or leave it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like that. Nowadays we have, I believe, a very large market share of visual media is being consumed on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and a very, very large portion of that is being subtitled. And now there's auto-generated captions, and there's auto translations that are possible as well. And so the necessity and need for language to be spoken in a certain language that's understood by the viewer is becoming less and less. And we miss the cultural authenticity of hearing different voices and different perspectives and different cadence and tone by translating everything. The other option for us would have been to have some of these athletes speak English. Kaike Alves and Friedrich and Sondre, who are the Norwegian. Kaike is a Portuguese speaker from Brazil, but he competes at the University of Alabama. The two Norwegian athletes that spoke about were speaking for the table tennis sections. They speak English as well, and so those 3 athletes, like they all spoke perfect English. They could have done the interviews in English. We requested that they do them in their native languages because, and I'm seeing this so much with the World Cup, but I'm seeing that someone will try to speak English and answer questions in English, and they answer like they are on TV. Like they answer like they hear people answer when they are asked questions for broadcast, not as themselves. And the second that we ask, hey, can you do that in your native tongue? Like, could you do that again in Spanish or Hindi or however? They open up immediately. There's comfort immediately. It's like the training wheels are off almost, and there's a fluidity and joyousness with that language that comes almost effortlessly, it seems. And I have examples of this. I'll make a video as well. Recently, I have 2 interviews that I did at the World Cup where they start to answer in English. They finish their question. Then I ask, can you switch the language and say that again? And without speaking their language, you can see instantly the comfort just rise, tenfold. And if this is truly an international film, like we need to bring voices that are international into the fold, for sure.
Indeed. What were some of the biggest challenges that came with making Unseen Olympiad, not just in terms of capturing the competition on film, but also respecting the different cultures at play here?
What are the challenges?
Yes.
At the end of the day, the athlete's experience is me versus me. Like, am I going to wake up today and am I going to do what I need to do to be able to make my dreams a reality? And something that I've learned significantly from these athletes and from these experiences is that I'm, at the end of the day, my biggest roadblock towards achieving my goals. And that can be defeatist, and I can look at that and say, oh, I'm the problem and I keep being the problem, and oh, well, woe's me. Or it can be, well, if I'm the only thing in my way, then anything is possible. And that might be an abstract challenge, but for me as a this is my first feature. It's the first time that I, as a filmmaker, was able to merge these parts of my life where I was growing up around the world of sport, and then I became a filmmaker, and I was able to merge these things. And, was doing it with really relatively almost no experience, except for my experience on sets over the years and my experience as a camera person. But as a director, I brand new. I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about distribution. I didn't know anything about a lot of this stuff. And I was really green. And I brought around people that cared a lot and that gave me a lot of their time. And they believed in this vision enough to, go the extra mile. And the biggest challenge is how can I do something that I don't know how to do yet? Like, and then it's about finding out, who do I ask about it? Who do I ask for help? Okay, they told me to do X, Y, and Z. That sounds really hard. I don't know if I want to do that. And it's getting okay with just, what, I got to suck it up and I got to do it. Like, and, they say, make one more call. I make one more call. They say, you got to have this, you got to have this made, you got to set these expectations, or you got to do this thing. I say, okay, I got to do it then. Like, recently, I'm preparing for one of my next projects, and I'm on the plane back to New Orleans 2 days ago, and this guy was like, do you love what you do? And I gave him this answer that was kind of jaded, and he was like, what's really going on? And I was like, well, I'm preparing for this thing, and I'm kind of not there yet. And he's like, so you haven't done your homework? And I'm like, yeah, I haven't done it. And I'm like, oh. So I can look at that and I can say that's a challenge, like, but it's an easy challenge. It's like, okay, what do I need to do today, like, and can I prepare today, and like, can I be 1% better, or can I do what I need to do today, and go from there. Because if I just shoot for the moon and I say, oh, I'm going to shoot for the moon, and then with these events, they're going to happen without me. In 2 years, the LA Olympics is happening, whether I'm there or not. Like, Salt Lake Olympics is happening 2032, whether I'm there or not. Am I going to be there doing what I love to do, or am I going to, or not? And I can only focus on what I can control. And so right now I'm like, okay, I'm focusing on what I can control, and what will fall into place will fall into place. The biggest challenge was when I was trying to control things I couldn't, and really quickly I had people right that ship for me. If that happened, either I was able to write it pretty quick, or other people helped me out with that, and for that I feel really grateful and really blessed.
What have you taken away from making Unseen Olympiad, and how has the experience of making it helped to prepare you for making your next projects?
I learned so much on this project. Like, truly, it was like absolutely like going to a master's program or some type of really quality film school. I went to Loyola. I studied economics in school. I took a few film classes that got me a film minor. I took like 3 or 4 film classes that were production classes, and I never had that formal education. To me, this was my formal education. This was like, how do you prep a film in multiple cities, in multiple countries? How do I deal with international film labs and transporting raw film stock and exposed film like throughout the world? Like, how do I work with other producers on a long form project that takes over 2 years? How do I write grants? And how do I fellowship programs? Like, how do I apply for these things? How do I introduce myself to that world? Like, what is a film festival really like? Like, what's a distributor do? What do I deal with rights, with music licensing rights, with legal production contracts, back end? Like, how do I make a cohesive story? How do I take notes from people? We did screen tests. We did 4 cities of a tour for fundraising and screen testing of our rough cut. Getting a couple hundred people together. Like, how do I ask people for money? All these things. I learned so much doing this, and I was coming from literally, we started out, we were filming some middle schoolers snowboarding, and we were just seeing what we could get, and so it was just, film as a gift, like a true gift. I don't think I can really express that fully. It's an immense gift and benefit to me, for it to exist as a wonderful piece of art, and something that I believe really reflects how talented and wonderful all of the people who collaborated with me on it are, is one thing. The other part of it is, I feel that I was able to finally jump out of what it's like to work on set, where everything's really on a good set, at least, everything's taken care of. There's a payroll company, there's a production company, where you're filming, you have a call sheet. Everything's kind of ready for you if you're a crew person, which I was for years and still am. You walk in and it's pretty dialed. Like, you do your job and you go home and you get paid. Doing that from scratch and being the person who's the key for that, at the same time as being the director, was so eye-opening. And it's like, oh, that structure's not here because I didn't put it here. And it's like, okay, well, I have to learn how to do stuff like that. And what a gift to be able to experience that. And I try to pass that stuff on, because it took me a long time to be able to learn it.
And finally, what do you hope audiences take away from seeing Unseen Olympiad, even if they're not sports fans?
I really don't feel it's necessary to be a sports fan to enjoy this film. I would be pitching it, and I was not really pointing to the fact that it was a sports film. I was pointing to the fact that it was a film about the emotional journey of how people achieve greatness, and it's told through the lens of international sporting events. And so for anyone who is struggling with finding a way to get to their goals, or struggling to move to that next step or to change, I feel that there's a place for this film within your journey of evolving and becoming. And I feel like it's more of that than it is how do I become a great athlete. And if you're an athlete, I think you could watch it and maybe it'll help too. But I feel like it's very universal and applicable.
Definitely is. Casey Shaw, the brilliant director of Unseen Olympiad, which is coming soon from his production company, Shawscope. Casey, thank you so much for coming on today to talk about this incredible film. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed our conversation. I would love to have you back on at some point to discuss your future projects.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Very welcome. It's my pleasure. That's the Viewfinder podcast for this week. I'm Chris Hadley. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, please stay safe, everyone.
The Viewfinder podcast is hosted, written, produced, and edited by Chris Hadley. The show's title logo is designed by Madison LeBlanc. Be sure to like, listen, and subscribe to the Viewfinder podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out video versions of the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Viewfinder Podcast with Chris H., all one word. Let us know what you think by leaving a review on this or any other episode. If you have any questions, comments, and or guest suggestions, or if you'd like to join Chris as a guest on an upcoming episode of the show, please contact us at theviewfinderpodcast@gmail.com. That's theviewfinderpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on X at ViewfinderPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/theviewfinderpodcast, and on Instagram at The Viewfinder Podcast. This has been The Viewfinder Podcast with Chris Hadley. This is Eric Woods speaking.